All right. So today I'm going live with Kelly Powers. We have actually not met in person, but we're both Bay Area kind of food related people. She very much so, and myself sort of formerly. And she's a dietitian and a recipe developer, and she has quite an interesting story. So I've sort of kept track of her since we first started talking. Hi, Lucas. So what I like about Kelly is there are a lot of sort of, good, let's talk about your diet. Hi, Maria. Let's talk diet and food with this lady. So what I love about her is there are a lot of people on Instagram who are like, into recipes and wellness and stuff, but they're not dietitians. She comes from like a hardcore, like lead dietitian and eating disorder clinic, happened to like have a food startup for a bit, and then she went and got a food studies degree in Rome, which I really like. I love when American women go international, men and women, and I know Lucas is doing that right now and has done that with many of his degrees. Maria, I know you've been kind of all over the place too, so I very much relate to that. And we're going to talk a little bit about her background, and then I'm hoping we can get into questions about health. So just So ask your questions, ask your cooking questions. So she specializes also in teaching people how to cook. Her particular focus is batch cooking. So she has a theory that every meal you make should take you less than 10 minutes. And I used to be a private chef, and that was sort of my way of cooking for my clients. I would do batch cooking. So I'd cook like a ton of quinoa, a lot of broccoli, and then they would make the combinations for the week. And then sometimes I would tell them how to combine things. I'd make a big salad dressing and so on. And here's Kelly, and she's really actively doing this work. So it's a nice coincidence that we both have the backdrop of having been a private chef before. And so we have that relationship with batch cooking, but she's definitely more sort of like in it and that she has the dietitian degree, which I really respect, and the background working at a health clinic, which I also really, really respect. Hi.
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I'm so glad this worked out. Thank you for having me.
I loved your video on your website. I thought you were so like real and kind of like and sort of like unrehearsed in a way, but just
Yeah.
getting to your stuff.
Yeah,
And
right.
then I saw on your website you had a video of you had a documentary posted of Princess Diana.
I don't.
You don't?
No, did
Oh,
that maybe pop up after the YouTube video was finished?
it could have been. Oh, I thought
Maybe.
maybe you were like passionate about Diana.
Oh no. I mean, I remember when I was younger when she
Yeah,
passed
yeah, yeah.
away and everything, but
Yes.
I was fairly young. I remember more so how it impacted my mom, to be honest, but
So we have Lucas, a friend of mine, on the line with us, and
oh
has
nice.
already said, "I need help with my diet." And he goes, "I need help. I need a diet for a flat stomach." So while we have him with us, let's just use that as like an entry point. Like, I know you specialize in women, but if you have people who are concerned with belly fat, is there any kind of path that you recommend people taking food wise?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it all goes back to getting into the kitchen, right? And so
Hey,
preparing,
Lucas. Yes.
sorry?
I'm saying to him, get in the kitchen. I want to hear if he's in the kitchen. Are you cooking, Lucas?
Yeah, so kind of really taking control and reclaiming your power around food in that sense. I think it's a great starting point. And honestly, even before that, it's going to go to the grocery store and what you're bringing into your home and into your environment. But really focusing on eating whole foods, your eating frequency when you're starting to eat throughout the day, and how constantly you're eating, or how long is going in between meals or snacks or whatnot, because it's going to affect your hunger hormones, which in turn is going to affect honestly when, how, what, why you're really eating, which in
Yeah.
turn is going to obviously impact the total amount of calories and consumption you're having throughout the day and throughout the week. I think it's going back to also looking at your macro profile and making sure that it's sound. And right now, well, based off of nutritional science and current current research, my program is built to 45% carbs, 30 protein, 25 fat. So it is a little bit of a higher protein plan. And it's definitely doable, though. I definitely work from a space of non-restriction. And I think as you and I kind of chatted back and forth about, that comes from my experience working in eating disorders, and particularly also working with women and helping them reframe that relationship with food and
With
finding.
carbs especially, right? Because those are sort of like, they can kind of spiral people a bit, right?
I'm sorry?
Carbs can be an interesting relationship to
It
kind of
can be, yeah.
readjust.
And oftentimes I think a lot of people have a misconception that they're addicted to sugar or that carbs can be negative or whatnot. But oftentimes that occurs more so when we're underfed. And so that's why it goes back to taking a look at your eating frequency and paying attention as much as you can to your hunger cues throughout the day and with meals. So that's going to be before you're eating, while you're eating, and then after as well. And so I definitely work from a space of not demonizing foods, like I mentioned. And so I do think there's space for all food groups in your diet. But I think it's also, sleep, stress, so many of those things are going to affect it, especially around your waistline, what Lucas is asking about, because if your cortisol is increased, then you are going to retain more belly fat. But also at the same time, there are studies that show the more you diet chronically, the more your body is going to retain fat as well. So it's about finding, I think my approach is very lifestyle. It's very sustainable. And so it's not something that's yo-yo dieting or fad diets, because we do know now that chronic dieting is going to result in a shift in your body composition.
Right. He's asking also about just, I mean, what do you see in general, Kelly, when people up their protein and decrease their carbs? Like how does the body usually respond to that if he's going to experiment with doing more protein and fewer carbs?
Yeah, I think that what you're going to need to do is really be paying attention to how you're feeling, because I think it's important to fixate on these things or to focus and ensure that your body's being fed well, but our body works on averages. It's not going to necessarily focus on one specific meal or how many grams of protein you have at breakfast. And a lot of times there's also a misconception around how much protein is in non-animal protein sources. So a lot of times, especially in this country, I feel a lot of people need to have a steak or a chicken breast or a fillet of fish or some kind of animal protein on top of their plate, which in fact, if you were to analyze all of the nutrition that you are consuming, you often are getting enough protein from plant-based items. And so you can definitely switch it. I would say, honestly, like if Lucas were to be interested in working with somebody, if he wanted extra support, it might be a way to not fixate on these things so much, but enjoy food again, or in a more pleasurable manner. Because if somebody can help you remove the barriers and the stress around that, then you can kind of enjoy food in a more natural way. But we do need a minimum of carbohydrates. It's generally 120 to 140 a day for our brain just to function, because it is our preferred energy source as human beings and for our body in general. And it's what your body's going to use for energy and for its first source of energy. And so it's going to give you what you need to sustain your day, and it's also going to suppress your hunger quicker than protein or fat would. And so it's really important. Honestly, I would highly recommend too, when you are consuming or building your meals, to go ahead and have a balanced macro profile. So you do want to, and even with your snacks, I wouldn't say just grab an apple. I would say grab an apple and a handful of nuts or a slice of cheese or something that's going to give you some protein and fat as well, instead of just sugars. Even though the sugar is coming with fiber and it's great, it's better than refined sugar, for example, but making sure that you are building a plate that is balanced to where you have the carbohydrates to suppress your hunger initially and immediately, but then you also have a substantial amount of protein and fat to withstand that satiation.
Yes, it's such a good suggestion. I have one friend who talks about, like, she likes to have a piece of bread at the side of the salad because she feels it prevents her from snacking later on like carbs. Like if there's not enough carbs going on in her lunch, she'll find she's like craving little sweet things. So I try to get a piece of bread into things.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't want to have bread, by all means, then don't have bread. Maybe go with farro or quinoa or brown rice or couscous or amaranth or something that's a whole grain, because then you're going to up your fiber intake as well. I do think it's interesting how, as a culture, we've come to to currently, it comes in phases or waves, right? Demonize carbohydrates. And then we wonder why often we have these sugar cravings or whatnot, but it's just your body letting you know that it needs energy. And that's the
Yes.
quickest source of energy or fuel that it can get from food. So
Yeah.
it's important to be aware of all of these things, but I do think it's really ideal or beneficial to individuals when they can also step away from that and be able to trust their body and
Yes.
trust what they're doing and what they're consuming, so they can then shift their relationship with food and it becomes more sustainable.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I wish I could figure out how I got to have a healthy relationship with food, because I have memories of the complete opposite. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, anyone who's watching now or who's watching later, you know, what I want to say from my end is, you know, if you're struggling with food, it's absolutely possible to get to the other end. Like, things can change, so don't feel too trapped. What would you recommend, having worked with people in eating disorders or working with people even on like Lucas's level, who just, he's saying like, I do enjoy food. He's like, maybe I enjoy it a little too much, but he's having some kind of conflict with his, you know, eating that he's bringing to the table.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend for people sort of moving from from the place of like conflict to a place of pleasure and joy and peace with food?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's hard to generalize too, because we are so
Yes.
individual and our lifestyles are so different. And struggles for Lucas or barriers for him might not be existing for other people in even a similar space where you think that they might be parallel or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I think it's making sure that you're fed and that you're fueling your body and your lifestyle properly. And that again also goes back to trying to listen to your hunger cues. And that might take some time to build upon, right? Because we innately have them when we're born and as children. And if you watch a child eat, then you'll see that they do pull away or turn their head when they're full or when they're done. And due to society, the media, parents, care providers,
Mm-hmm.
everyone around us, it's pulled away in a sense over time, and it shifts a bit to where we do kind of lose that innate those innate cues. And so being able to build those back up, it might take time, but that's where it again goes back to fueling yourself well. And that's where I recommend having breakfast within an hour of waking and eating frequently throughout the day, every 3 to 4 hours, and going back to building your plates that are balanced with the proper macronutrients and having carbohydrates, proteins, and fats.
So what is, when you were back in school as a dietitian, like was the phrase intermittent fasting alive in your classes?
Honestly, no.
Okay. And what's your opinion on that? Why? It seems like you are recommending us against that. What's your opinion?
Yeah, so I think I have done some research around it, and I do think of just as the same with any restriction or any dietary choice, it's a personal choice, and there
Yeah.
often are medical, moral, religious reasons as to why this is done. Fasting is something that's common throughout the world and has been for generations and centuries. But I think for the purpose that we've kind of coined it as, at least here, and what I've seen with people and with clients is it's meant to be a new diet or a new trend or a new fad. I think it all goes back to sustainability for me, to be honest. And so yes, maybe you can do that. It's kind of like the Whole30, or it's a kickstart or whatever it may be. But then what happens after? You
Mm-hmm.
know, like how long can you maintain that, and how long do you want to maintain that? Is it providing joy? Are you finding pleasure in food? Are you happy with your routines? Are you happy
Yeah.
with what you're doing? And again, it also goes back to your hunger hormones. And so that's the psychological component behind it. And it's so much deeper than that. I'm just grazing the surface.
Yeah.
But physiologically, you're not going to activate your metabolism each day if you're getting up
Fasting till
and not
noon.
having anything.
Yeah.
So that's why it's great to have something about an hour or so within waking, and also being mindful and respecting your hunger cues. But with intermittent fasting, you're given a very short window, and there's so many rules around it, and oftentimes rules with food come to result to demonizing it, and then it fosters an unhealthy, unsustainable relationship.
Yes. Yes. I
So I
totally
do
see that
think,
that happens. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I totally see that that happens. Like, it kind
Yeah.
of, but it is somewhat in the category of like, you know, admiring starvation or deprivation.
Yeah, exactly. And then it
Yeah.
often leads to, and that's why, again, it's so individual. And so I think someone needs to reflect upon how it's working for them, or how it's serving them, what it's providing. Because if you're likely not going to consume anything for a greater period of time, your ghrelin and your hunger hormones are going to be more through the roof, and you're going to eat in a non-mindful manner. You're going to likely overconsume, and it can often foster this pattern or this cycle where you then overconsume, have guilt, restrict, and it continues this pattern. And
Yeah.
that's then what you're hardwiring in your brain as what you know and what to do, instead of the opposite direction where maybe you don't see immediate results because you're not dropping water weight or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it is something that progresses over time that you can maintain and manage.
Yeah. So before we jump into Lucas's next questions, like for your client, let's say, who's 30, she's, healthy, she does yoga twice a week, let's say she runs once a week, not crazy exerciser. Can you walk us through like what you would ideally want to see her eat in the course of a day, starting with how she wakes up and what she does, just to get
Yeah.
some of your philosophy?
Yeah, of course. And I think, again, I will say, just like as a disclaimer, it's so individualized, right?
Yes.
Because it's also going to depend on what's happened in that individual's life up to that point and
Yeah.
to the age of 30, what their relationship with food is, their experience, their exposure, the access they have to things, their skill set in the kitchen. There's so much that does go into it, right? And that's
Yeah.
just in a way to not give somebody a blanket plan that
Sure.
then is going to leave them feeling unsuccessful and defeated. Because
Yeah.
my big approach thing is empowerment, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's so important. And I did a lot of my thesis work around it in incorporating behavioral economics. And what I really did come to find was that this piece of self-efficacy, or one's ability to do things in the kitchen, wherever it may be, mine was particular for in the kitchen and around food,
Mm-hmm.
really impacted their success. And so I think focusing or knowing that going into it is very important. But I would say, like with our busy lifestyle, right? Like ideally you're batch cooking as much as possible so you have control over what you're eating. You're not relying on coffee and maybe a pastry or something from the corner market until you have a meeting at 11 o'clock or a lunch meeting at 1 or whatnot, because again, that affects your hunger hormones. Your eating frequency is really important here. I would definitely say preparing something in the morning. My plan's built to 1600 calories right now, and I will eventually offer other options as well. But what I found with my target population is that's fairly appropriate. I do try to pull them out of that and help them, or hope that they have trust in my education, my credentials, my experience, to where I take care of all of that for them, and it allows them to then eat, right?
Yeah.
So it would be anything in the morning from, I think outside of this current time where a lot of us are home,
Mm-hmm.
and can, have the pleasure of making eggs in the morning or something, for example. That's not necessarily realistic in our past life or what might become
Mm-hmm.
in the future. And so having a balanced breakfast, it might be overnight oats, overnight couscous, a smoothie, a yogurt bowl, eggs if it's possible, whatever really works. It's often going to be a base of a carbohydrate with, like, for example, if we were to build a bowl together or whatnot, it would be either oatmeal, oatmeal, couscous, quinoa,
Mm-hmm.
amaranth, some kind of whole grain, so you get a lot of fiber, because it's also going to maintain your hunger
Yeah.
for some time. So that, and then we would add in maybe some collagen peptides to be able to up the protein a bit if we're not going to be doing eggs or some kind of animal protein or beans or whatnot, which can be a little difficult at breakfast time. Nut butters for some additional protein, healthy fats, maybe hemp seeds, some superfood powders, a decent amount of fruit. I do try to help people steer away from refined sugars, added sugars, and keeping everything as whole food based as possible.
Yeah.
So that would be a great breakfast. And then I would say within 2 to 3 hours, sorry, I have something in my eye, having a mid-morning snack, which would be, again, combining some macronutrients. So you have a carbohydrate and then either a protein or a fat, or a combination of three. It's also keeping things as simple as possible.
Yeah.
So it might be some whole wheat crackers and hummus, or some veggies and hummus. It might be an apple and a slice of cheese, some nuts, and some blueberries or something. I think it really depends on preference. And also snacks are a great way to utilize the extra food you have in your kitchen or in your fridge.
Yeah.
So kind of pulling, from what you've purchased for the week. And I think it also depends on if people want something sweet or savory too. I think honoring those preferences so you aren't eating something to eat it because it fits this calculation, but you're also enjoying it because to me, food it's a platform for love, and it's also a form of self care. And I think it can be something that can allow us in our current situation and also just in general life to take a
Yeah.
moment and slow down and really be
Yeah.
present with ourselves and with our food or our meal,
Yeah.
which is something that I think is really important and that we're often lacking, especially when things are so busy and so go go go. So it would be having then a snack and then having a balanced lunch, which would be comparable to what your dinner would look like.
Yeah.
It could be a salad, like you were saying, but throwing in some carbohydrates, some protein on top, which could be
Yeah.
beans, chicken, whatever it may be, and then having a snack midday around like 3 or 4 before going home and having dinner. And it's also going to depend on your commute, your workout schedule, if you need to
Yeah.
have some supplement before or after. And then oftentimes if you need, it depends also on how many hours you're up throughout the day
I
too.
love like your approach of gentle, like I feel like a real sense of like gentleness, moderation,
Mm-hmm.
balance. Like you're encouraging people to sort of get all the groups within every meal, to have snacks, once, twice a day is what you're recommending, and to keep your body from kind of flipping out. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that that approach comes from like what I see it as like a more nutritionist, dietitian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're working with a nutritionist or dietitian who's like sort of less loving and gentle, it becomes sort of something else. But I think the approach is similar. It's like we want you to be balanced, we want you to have enough.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's where the nutritional
yeah,
science background and the education comes in, right? So I would
yeah,
hope most dietitians would be, or all dietitians would be promoting and supporting that. I think it's just finding your person in a sense.
yeah,
And for me, I would say it's a lot of it stems from the time I've spent in Italy and seeing and experiencing and having so much exposure to another food culture that does parallel that.
yeah.
And also working in eating disorders and really having that reframe how I approach my work with a lot of empathy and compassion and understanding.
Yeah, let's dig into both of those worlds. So we'll start with Italy. Like, what did you learn about how Italians eat that you've kept with you? And what do you think maybe that culture, what does that culture get right and what does it get wrong, if anything?
If anything. Uh, that's where I would probably be with it. I could talk about Italy all
Yeah.
day. It's a beautiful place, and I think that's really where the passion and the love around food and the ability that it has to really bring people together and build community. It's a really beautiful thing to have a 2 3 hour lunch or whatnot. Same with
Yeah.
dinner, with a table of people that you love and very, very simple yet high quality food. And it just brings everything back to simplicity. And so I think those are the things I've carried with me or throughout. You can see like, or go throughout everything that I do and all of the work that I do and the projects and things that I build. So it's like simplicity, pure, real food and honoring that. My graduate degree was in food studies. So it centered a lot around sustainable consumption and production. So kind of going back to our roots and back to the land. And then also the pleasure piece and that ability for it to be so much more than food.
Mm-hmm. I like that you bring up simplicity because I think Italian cooking, some people might overlook it, but in general with Italian recipes, you're going to have fewer ingredients than with like an Israeli recipe, for instance. So tell us why, and is that true? Is that true that Italians use fewer ingredients and higher quality ingredients when they're putting together dishes?
In my experience, yes. I would say the quality, it's interesting there because it makes it almost feel like it's a class system here where you can get organic or you can afford and have the privilege of having a farm box delivered or you can go to the farmer's market or whatnot versus being in a food desert. And I'm sure they exist there too, but at a very, very lower rate. And when you go to the market, things aren't labeled organic and non-organic. Everything just is. And so it's the way it's produced. It's honoring tradition and heritage in the land as well. And I'm sure in some places that's shifted and there is larger ag and production and whatnot. But because like there's for me I struggle eating tomatoes here in this country because there's something about Italian tomatoes that
Yeah.
you taste the soil and you taste the sunshine, and I know it's corny, but you taste the love like in the food. And
Yeah.
you could go and take a beautiful olive oil and pour it over some tomatoes and maybe have some fresh bread from the baker downstairs and grab some prosciutto, mozzarella, and you have a beautiful meal and you don't even have to cook, and it still is balanced, and it's very, very nice. And so the quality, it's in the food, it's in the soil, it's in also the weather and the sunshine. And I know in California we're very blessed and fortunate to have
Yeah.
access to a lot of fresh food too, but it's still different.
Yeah. They say California is the only Mediterranean climate outside the Mediterranean.
Hmm.
And then what about sort of downsides of Italian food culture, if anything?
I would say from a nutrition standpoint, as
Yeah.
a dietitian and from my education and
Yeah.
whatnot, breakfast, honestly. It is
Right.
usually a cornetto and a cappuccino, which is a croissant and
Right.
coffee. But it does come with a decent amount of milk, and it's not just an espresso. Sometimes Italians prefer to have just an espresso, which is fine as well. But for me, the way I worked around it is I would often have oatmeal or breakfast at home, and
Yeah.
then cafe and have myself a coffee
No,
and work.
you're right. That can really mess. I mean, when you're, a woman traveling on her own and, especially I spent a lot of time traveling through Italy as a young woman, and that kind of breakfast in Italy really did mess me up, like skin
Mhm.
wise and blood sugar for the day and just,
Mhm.
had craving more. That was something that was hard to correct without having like a cooking kitchen when you're staying in a hotel.
Yeah.
And it's fun to indulge in, but I do kind of wonder how
Absolutely,
how
absolutely.
they
I was
adjust to it.
living there. I wasn't just
Yeah.
traveling, so I
Yeah,
did
yeah.
have that opportunity in that space,
Right.
and it was such a long period of time that I was still able to enjoy and indulge, but I also wanted
Yeah.
to sustain my
Yeah.
day and my lifestyle.
Who does, it's an interesting question, like of the Europeans, because Lucas is saying, yeah, Europeans are bad at breakfast. I'm sort of
Yeah.
remembering certain breakfasts, trying to think where I had great, great breakfast. I mean, I actually love like a Russian breakfast, I think is really
I'm not
fun.
familiar with it.
It'll have like a little like caviar roe and
Oh.
like little blintzes and some
Uh-huh.
eggs. So you get like this whole
Yeah.
smattering.
Yeah, I was actually going
Um,
to say Moroccan because it is also
yeah,
very similar. You have a lot of fresh fruit, some nice tea or coffee, some orange juice often, but you do have some fresh homemade bread, some cheeses, and also eggs.
yeah.
So I did feel that when I was there, I had a substantial meal to get me going for the day.
Yeah, Asia. I mean, Lucas is bringing up Asian breakfast and how amazing it is, how they've done the
Japanese
broths and the
breakfast, I would say
savory.
too, because
Yeah,
oftentimes it has like a brodo and also like a broth or something, and then
yeah,
also a piece of fish too. Like they'll
yeah,
throw fish in the morning because
yeah.
it's such a part of their culture and their diet. So,
Let me
yeah.
ask you, how do you well, you know what, let's stick with what we set up. So let's talk about you when you were working as the lead dietitian at a eating disorder clinic. Like, it's no small thing to do. It really shows your
No.
chops. Like, what were your takeaways? What was it like? What surprised you about it?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It was a very interesting space to be in. And it was a residential level of care. So we had our patients there 24 hours a day, nursing staff, a full treatment team and whatnot. And I learned a lot, and it was a place where I really started honing in on counseling skills and really connecting with somebody and being able to support them through their journey. It's also a place where I learned the importance of self-care, honestly, because I had to be able to refuel and provide those things for people at that level of care, which was it was a challenge and it was hard. I'm not gonna
Like,
lie.
what are the specifics of that? Like, you'd need to have your own self-care routine.
Yeah, I really dove into yoga at that point.
Yeah,
Made sure that I had a good balance with the amount of hours that I worked there and other projects that I was doing to where I didn't feel so
yeah.
overwhelmed or I didn't have
Because it's emotional. Is
it's
that
very emotional, and I
stressful?
think being
Emotional.
an empathetic person, it can pull and it can weigh on you a lot, and so it's very important to have a support system and even a team and a professional network that you can rely on or you can bounce things off of and whatnot. And that's where the treatment team comes in, and also external dietitians and therapists and things in my community as an individual. And so it was a great learning experience. It was something that I think is now built into or helped me cultivate everything and every project I've worked on since, because it's a big piece of the empowerment. And I did run like a weekly cooking group with all of the patients and also did restaurant outings and whatnot. So that was where I really found my footing, I think, especially in the kitchen, because I'm very, very comfortable in the kitchen. And so it's where I learned or realized I wanted to bring those things to more of a mainstream community to be able to help more women, because so many people in this country do have a form or a piece of disordered eating oftentimes. And so being able to reach them in a space where they could then actually apply these things, through the restaurant outings and through the cooking group or the cooking class, I really learned and saw that I wanted to help with things that were very applicable, and actually empowered people to feel supported and confident in themselves to be able to make change.
What were the cardinal rules of creating a food plan for someone with an eating disorder? Like, what were the rules that you remember?
Yeah, so we actually had templates and things that were, our specific clinic worked with, like, not, I don't know how to explain it. It was basically you would be allocated or allotted a certain amount of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, but it was broken down then into fruits, vegetable servings, grains, whatever it may be throughout the day. And then with the dietitian, those would be broken down further and allocated 2 meals. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then snacks, 2 to 3, depending upon the patient's needs and their caloric needs. And that would be worked out between the patient and the dietitian. Basically, the dietitian ultimately is providing them support and building their meal plan. And to be honest, it would be a hard space to be in at times, because if it has to be increased, whatever it may be, or even decreased at points, it's difficult to do and to have those conversations and to have somebody put trust in you when it's such a psychological, mental condition. And oftentimes
So
you
challenging.
then become the enemy. And so that was something to learn how to work through and whatnot as well, but still stay strong and be supportive and realize that it oftentimes is the disorder, it is the disease rather than the person.
Yes.
Yeah. So
It is so challenging. Like, eating disorders are so complex and mysterious and challenging. And I just love that you worked in those trenches, because it just paralyzes people.
yeah, it
Yeah.
does. So to be able to empower them and support them to work through it, it was a really honorable thing to do. And I felt like it really was fulfilling for me. And it just got to a point in the end where it was weighing on me a bit, and I had been there for a couple years, and I continued to travel to Rome, and I studied abroad when I was much younger in Florence, and that's kind of when this love for Italy was really fostered. And as I kept going back, I eventually didn't want to leave, and so that's when I knew I needed to make a shift and make a change and be able to live my life
How
there.
did you find that program? Like, how did you find the program you decided on?
Yeah, so I was actually in Rome on holiday with my friend. I met my Norwegian friend there, and we were sitting in a cafe, and she had some work to get done on a project that she was working on. And I was kind of just reading, hanging out, and I found a flyer there that they had for an American university. And it was in food studies. And so, of course, I was curious because I had considered getting a master's and becoming a dietitian. I actually have a graduate certificate, and I could continue on, but I wanted a shift and a change. And I'd been in the city for nearly a decade at that point, and so I felt I needed a new challenge. And so I found this flyer, and I kind of didn't really think too much of it. I looked over it and hung out while she was working, and then we went on with our day. And then I went to Italy again, I think a year later, and it was at that point when I really didn't want to leave, and I felt a sense of being home every time I get there.
I know the feeling. You just stay. You just don't take the return flight.
I know, right? But I had to at that point. It's all responsibilities here to come back to. And then I remember I was just at a point where I was ready, and so I started looking up, and it kind of, that flyer and that program was out of my mind. I kind of forgot about it. I went on with my life. I think it was at least like six to 8 months or so had passed, and then I was ready. I was in Italy, and then I didn't want to come back, and so then I started to kind of just make moves around it, and I just started looking up graduate programs in nutrition in Rome, and that one came up, and I didn't even make the connection at first, and then I did, and I realized, like, there was purpose behind me seeing it before and then me finding it again. And so
Yeah.
I ended up applying. I was actually writing my personal statement. I work very well at deadlines and
Yeah.
can procrastinate quite a bit. And so I was writing my personal statement. I was actually on vacation with a group of friends down in Mexico, and I was sitting there and they were all like enjoying their time, and I was like writing, right?
Yeah.
And I submitted it, I got in, I subletted my apartment, and I moved. And
Nice.
I was there for like 15 months.
Love
So.
it. I'm gonna text you afterwards, asking you for your favorite spots in Rome because I want to
Oh,
give you a sec to
I have
think
a
of it.
whole,
Yeah, I
yeah.
want to share that because I'm sure you have an amazing
Yeah, I have a
set of
Google
food
Doc I
recommendations.
can share with you. I'd be more than happy
Okay.
to. And then I actually wrote a post a bit back about a perfect day in Rome. So
Okay.
if
I want
I were
to
to
think
be
of it.
there for like 24 hours or 36 hours or so, then this would be
Yeah.
kind of my journey. So I'd be more than
Yeah.
happy to share them.
And then what was the before you moved to Rome? So before Kelly moved to Rome, she was working as a dietitian at the eating disorder clinic, but also working on a food startup with a small group of people. So
Yeah.
what was that? What was the concept there?
Yeah, so that it was called a Lola, and there were four of us. Basically, we set out to provide nutrition education through technology, so we could reach a broad group of people. Excuse me. And what it turned into, which is something I still honestly really believe in and would like to pick back up again. I'm working on another project as well as 52 weeks, and so I have to pace myself. But we were analyzing or hoping to, we were writing software to analyze grocery receipts because, like I mentioned at the start of our call, yes, getting back in the kitchen is great and a very, very good starting point and place to begin. But before we can even do that, it depends on what we bring into our home and into the kitchen, and that's going to start at the grocery store. And so what we wanted to do again was provide education as to what an individual or a household needed based on the people that were there, their goals, their sex, their age, basically their anthropometrics and whatnot. And so once we calculated all of that out, we would connect with the software from the store. So if it were like a Bonds like club or program or whatnot, then it would automatically feed us the data as to what your purchase history was or what you were buying. And so then our software would analyze that and compare
Nice.
it to your needs
I
as a
love
household
that.
or
Yeah.
as an individual. And then we would just provide simple, realistic recommendations.
Right.
Basically, hey, like you've been buying a lot of red meat, or it should your protein intake or purchases should last you this amount of time or this long, just so you're aware of that. But next time, why don't you try to buy some fish to balance it out? Or we saw you bought Oreos. Why don't you try Newman's O's because they have less chemicals, less additives,
I need
things
this.
like
I hope you create this.
I know, I want to. I do. I really, really do want to. So I think it'll be something I will revisit when the time's right
Yeah.
because it even feeds into 52 weeks in a sense that if someone were to maybe need recipes or support, but not going to the grocery store with a shopping list that's built for the plan that I've created for that week,
Yeah.
then they would still be able to have support and education around what they already purchased and how to make sustainable shifts to
Yeah.
get to the point where they know what they need. And so it's a way to educate to where eventually after you would be doing it for some time, you're likely going to then know, right? You're not going to need us anymore, which might not be an ideal business model, but ethically and morally, I've done my job and I've taught you how to grocery shop for your needs or for your lifestyle. And it's the same with 52 weeks in regards to building a plate and knowing what to buy for you, for how to translate essentially your nutritional needs and your macro needs into food, into real whole foods. Because I can give you numbers, but what are you going to do with those?
Yeah.
You know?
Traditionally, nutritionists and dietitians that I've worked with have been sort of agnostic when it comes to like being pescatarian, vegan, eating meat, whatever. I personally eat fish, but I don't eat any meat. And I've had all kinds of like past lifestyles regarding those choices. How do you navigate those choices with your clients? And are there any trends where you see like a certain diet works better for a certain kind of person or so on?
I think it's all going to go back to what works for you as an individual. And so as long as you're getting what you need nutritionally, then I'm not going to impose a specific diet on anybody. I do think a vegan diet might be a little hard to meet a lot of needs for a lot of people, but it still is done and can be done. But I think it also goes back to, if anything, I would say a Mediterranean diet, right? Because it's shown year after year after year to be the healthiest option or one of the healthiest diets. It's recommended by the like so many, like the Dietetics Association, the American Heart Association, the Diabetes Association or Foundation. So there's so much research around that, and it is supported and it's
Yeah.
sustainable. And it all goes back to
Like
portions.
a Mediterranean diet would just be small portions of meat, but the majority is
Of meat, it's more of a condiment. A
yeah,
majority of it is coming, a majority of your intake is coming from plant-based items. It's going to be lentils, beans, grains, things like that.
yeah,
Healthy fats, nuts, seeds, all of that, and then
yeah.
adding meat, especially red meat, more rarely, but a lot of fish. So it is more of a pescatarian-based diet.
Has your research and experience shown you any evidence for people eating according to their own ancestry, like eating the diet that their family sort of comes from genetically?
I haven't looked into that to be
Yeah,
honest. I think for that it would more so be like because I know there's blood tests that people can do and things
yeah,
like that and whatnot. I think again from my background and history working in eating disorders, it then often does lead to restriction
yeah,
and food rules and labels around food and intake. I do think that it could be maybe if it's not at that level, but it's more so what's familiar and what's known and what you know
yeah.
how to cook, what you know how to prepare, what your family prepares, and things like that. Then by all means, it's going to be ideal if you can maintain it and it's what's sustainable for you and it's what
Yeah.
is familiar and what you know.
I have a friend, Isabel Fox and Duke, who she basically, is like a leader in intuitive eating, and she made like a bold statement, which is like a diet for a woman or a man who has a past of eating disorders is like not only unwise, but it's dangerous because it can trigger sort of like
Inspired.
remission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like or trigger a reactivation. When you work with clients who have a past with any kind of eating disorder, what other things do you keep in mind when helping them figure out their new way of eating?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think making sure that they have a proper support system, and it also depends on their level of remission or how long, their level of behaviors or engagement or even the psychological component behind it. I think oftentimes removing, again, it's so individual, right? Somebody
Yeah,
might not, it might not benefit or serve them to have the nutrition information around the meals that they're consuming or
yeah,
preparing, the calories, the grams of protein, carbs, and fat, and things and like that. Some people it might be necessary. They might thrive with that. I think making sure that if a treatment team is needed, that's sourced, understanding that or being as compassionate and empathetic as possible and providing support and resources that allow them to work through all of it as well, because you can't necessarily take the brunt of everything if that makes sense. Like that's often why, especially at residential and even partial
yeah,
hospitalization or IOP or outpatient or whatnot, there is a full team. And so it's going to depend on the individual and how recovered they are in a sense. And oftentimes there are going to be lapses and there are going to be fallbacks. And I think it's building rapport and having great communication and trust built between the two of you. So that way you can support them and help them navigate it.
yeah. So great. I love what you're doing. I have so many questions for you, but let's go to what we planned also. So you went to Rome, you got back, and you started 52 weeks. So
Yeah.
who was your first client back in the Bay Area when you returned to Rome, and how did that relationship develop?
Yeah, so I actually started building 52 weeks. It's what I tested for my thesis. And so it's been in the works for a little while. I did a couple of MVPs and things like that. Back in the Bay, I would say it was somebody who I met through a Pilates studio when I did like a demonstration in a sense or a talk, and we ran a challenge together, which was great. And so it was nice because then they had the support of the fitness community and that community there because my program's virtual and whatnot and everything obviously now is but it was great because the philosophy of the Pilates studio was very much around sustainability and not exerting yourself to where you're injuring yourself or it's not something you can maintain, and
Which
so
is
it
your
was just
food philosophy.
yeah, it was a
Yeah,
beautiful marriage of the two and I feel that it was very supportive for the user at that
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then just to get back more into the specifics, like if someone starts a day where they've had like cereal and oat milk And so it wasn't like a balanced meal in the sense of including a protein and including like a super fibrous leafy green. What do
Yeah.
they then keep in mind for the rest of their eating for the day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's okay to do
Yeah.
that if that happens, right? And so I think first and foremost, honoring that,
Yeah.
and knowing that it's not going to be every meal, but really being present with it and enjoying it. And oftentimes, schedule things change and things shift, and it's better to have that than to have nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I think being okay with that, and it might take some work to get to that point, especially in the society and in this culture where it's so ingrained and pushed that you have to be having superfoods with every meal, and you have to have powders, and you have to have this green and that green and
Right.
whatnot.
Yeah.
So it can be a challenge to work through, and it can create and foster a lot of guilt and shame around food. So I think trying to remove that is going to be the first step. And then I would say listening to your body throughout the day. Oftentimes we don't. And it then creates this kind of habitual or machine like, lifestyle or eating or habits or whatnot, to where we're not truly honoring our needs because we're not tuning into them.
Yeah.
And so really trying to tune into them and saying like, or thinking, and of course being mindful of what you're consuming too. I'm not sitting here saying it's going to be healthier. As a dietitian, I recommend that you eat in and out
Yeah.
for 3 meals a day,
Yeah.
but when you do, enjoy it,
Yeah.
so there's that. But I think it's then finding a balance, right? And knowing and being mindful of what you're consuming. But then if maybe you didn't get it in then, like, it's okay. You still have several other opportunities throughout the day. And
Yeah.
even if the whole day is shot, you have tomorrow, so again, it goes back to that space of compassion and understanding. And it's not even just for other individuals. It all starts within,
Yeah.
and so understanding like, yes, I want to, or I need to get these things, and my body needs these things. It's where it thrives, and it's what's healthy for me, and it's going to sustain my lifestyle. But it's not to shame your actions
Yeah.
previous.
Let's jump into some of the like this or that questions because it'll
Mm-hmm.
also give people who join or who already are here the chance to give us two. So the way this little game works is I'm going to start off by saying olive oil or butter. And so we'll give her two options and then we'll hear why she's choosing one over the other.
Okay.
So let's start with olive oil or butter.
Olive oil.
Tell us why.
It goes back to the Mediterranean diet, but also nutritional science and studies are showing, like, we know that it's the monounsaturated fatty acids are so good for our body and for our heart and for our mind and for our skin and for our health overall. And also, it's very versatile. It's great to cook with. It's great to finish with. You can put it on salads. You can dip bread in it. You can eat it. Like, I cook with olive oil. It's really the only oil. It's the only oil, honestly, the only fat that I use in my program for cooking and whatnot. So definitely olive
like
oil.
I feel like there's like an argument about using olive oil when you have high heats.
Yeah, and actually, I'm in the middle of working on, which I mentioned to you, a project around olive oil, and it's very nice, high quality extra virgin olive oil from Tuscany, and it should be available in the coming weeks, and I'm very, very excited about it. But in doing so, I've been doing a lot of research, and it's actually it's not true. Olive oil can reach a very, very high temperature, and even with smoking, and the antioxidants are denatured in it, and they're not going to cause harm. And so I'll share it with you when it's ready, a post that's going to be coming out, and it's a series similar to this versus that, but it's extra virgin olive oil versus different types of fat. So it's versus coconut oil, it's versus butter, it's versus ghee, it's versus peanut oil, sesame oil, things like that. So I'd be happy to share it with you.
Yeah.
It also does break down all of the smoking points, and it incorporates a lot of research around this very topic.
Chia seeds or hemp seeds?
Ooh, that's a really hard one. I would say hemp seeds for smoothies and chia seeds for chia seed pudding. If I had to pick, honestly, I think I gravitate more towards hemp seeds.
Quinoa or rice?
Rice.
Rice, got it. Okay, and why do you prefer rice to quinoa?
It just satisfies me more. It's a personal preference. I definitely gravitate more towards brown rice just because it's more filling, but like, I had sushi rice for lunch yesterday, and it's just beautiful
Oh,
thing.
you're reminding me that I have seaweed to make sushi.
Oh,
My
nice.
boyfriend and I really like the short grain brown rice.
Yeah, that's what I do too because it's very similar to sushi rice. Nishiki, the Japanese company that I buy their sushi rice, they have a great brown rice sushi rice.
Ooh, okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Um, we're gonna get back to your like food recommendations. Like, I do want to hear some of your favorite products.
Mhm.
Um, what about yams or sweet potatoes?
Sweet potatoes.
Why?
Honestly, it's gonna be familiarity for me.
Yeah.
They're more familiar.
So, but like, what's the deal? Because like, I feel my boyfriend and I talk about this all the time. Like, aren't there orange yams and then also white yams?
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
isn't
there
it the same
are.
sweet potato? Like, I never know what is what. So, what's
Yeah.
how do we tell the difference between a yam and a sweet potato?
Honestly, I do with the labeling at the store.
Okay, fair
They
enough. Yeah.
look so similar, and I will be very transparent. I do love, though, Japanese sweet potatoes, and then like purple Japanese sweet potatoes, and also traditional sweet potatoes. So they give you a little bit of a different variety. They give you different antioxidants based on the color and whatnot. But yeah, it's just familiarity, I think. Yams are great and they're so similar. But it's not something I grew up incorporating in my diet or eating so much. And so
Yeah.
it's just habit and they're so comparable nutritionally that it's just what I gravitate towards.
Okay, Lucas had asked about coffee in the morning. Like, you are sort of like unique in my life in that you say, eat within an hour of waking, which I love because breakfast is my favorite meal.
Oh,
But
good.
it's so sort of like not what's trendy, right? Like, most
Yeah.
of my friends don't eat till noon. But
Hmm.
what tell us your take on coffee, because I feel like that is just like the immortal territory of dietitians and nutritionists. So,
Yeah, yeah, and
how do you feel?
as many people know, it's an appetite suppressant, right? But honestly, I have a cup of coffee. I take it on a personal level here, every morning generally, and then also often after lunch. And I do think what I do with it, and what I recommend people do, is have a meal with it or have
Yeah.
it after a meal so it doesn't then suppress your appetite because oftentimes like I said earlier we're on the go and we're very, very busy. And we'll have a cup of coffee, either be on the way out the door at home or at Starbucks or wherever your local corner cafe. And then we're fine, right? Your body tends to be okay, but it's because you're suppressing your appetite and your hunger. And that often then leads to overconsumption later in the day. And so, even if you can just have something small with it to build those hunger cues, to then be more mindful of them and allow your body to have the feeling of hunger and whatnot, which isn't a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the purpose behind it. And so I would definitely say, like, by all means, in moderation, as everything is. And it also with coffee, too. It depends on what you're putting in it and how you're taking it. Are you having a Frappuccino that's an extra large with whipped cream, or are you having a nice, high quality cup of coffee that's brewed and doesn't necessarily need any sugar or anything added to it, you know? So,
I want to ask you about supplements. What supplements do you take, if any?
Um, I actually rely on food for the most part. Oftentimes, if needed, I will take some vitamin D, just being in the city, and especially I'm in the inner sunset, and the fog's going to be rolling.
Oh,
The fog's going
nice.
to be rolling
I
in.
lived at 17th and Irving for a while and 48th and Noriega.
Oh,
So I
nice! Your
was a
first spot is
sunset
2 blocks
gal.
from mine. I'm like right next to your first
Nice.
spot. I'm honestly across the street from Golden Gate Park. It's very,
Wait,
very nice.
question. Do you shop at Sunset Super?
Yeah, oftentimes I do.
Isn't
Yeah,
it
I would say
great?
I was a bit disappointed in how they handled the pandemic, though, in
What
the
did they do?
well, they didn't do anything.
Oh,
And people just were hoarding and like, it was just people were too confined in the space. And so I
okay.
didn't really feel comfortable. I haven't been going too often.
Yeah.
But I love Andronicos. I've been, since I came back from Rome, it was unfortunate the timing, but Whole Foods got bought by Amazon and Andronicos got bought by Safeway. And so my two local markets aren't really so local anymore.
Right. You
But
have
it's
that super cute coffee shop there. What's it called? Something bird?
hollow.
Yes, Hollow. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
open? Is it doing takeout coffee?
I haven't been. I haven't been by actually. So
Okay.
I'm not sure. I hope for them it's quiet here.
Yeah.
I'm a bit worried to be honest about the local spots.
Yeah.
But no, it's a good neighborhood. I like it. The farmers market is great in the inner sunset on Sundays.
Yes. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Uh-huh. Shower or bath?
Shower.
Yoga or a walk?
Yoga.
Ice or no ice in your drinks?
Mm, light ice.
Light ice. It's so American. I feel like you could like not find a nutritionist outside of the US that like is okay with ice, but I love that
Right.
you're being honest. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I really don't have it much unless I'm making a cocktail or iced coffee because
Yeah.
I often am drinking water and I
Yeah.
like my water room temperature. So I guess no
Yeah.
ice. Yeah.
I also want to give you the chance to talk about like your own relationship to food growing up. Like, how did you get into this topic? And
Yeah.
like, how has it changed for
Fair.
you? Like, I'm sure at this point, like you know, don't have a nutritionist because you have all the knowledge yourself, right?
Mhm.
But have you worked with nutritionists in the past yourself? And just like, how did you start on this topic from your family?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't worked with a nutritionist just because I've worked with so many on a professional level and then also
Yeah.
through my education and whatnot. I actually, to be very honest and transparent, I grew up quite a picky eater. I often would have like veggies, chicken breast. Like I was very selective, and my palate wasn't expanded very much. It wasn't
Okay.
refined, I would say. And I was vegetarian for a little bit here and there, and then I actually started seeing a chef, and we lived together for many, many years, and it really allowed me to cultivate this connection with food that was different or unlike any I ever had had before.
Yes. It's
And
pretty much
my
the same thing
palate,
that happened to me. It's like
yeah.
when you're living with somebody who cooks well,
Oh
it
yeah.
just
It
like
changed my
opens
life,
your
you
yeah.
know. It did. And like training my palate, we used to kind of like he would test like give me sauce or test like tell be like what's in this? What's in this, you
Yeah.
know? And so it actually all started one time because his nona had made like burritos and prepared like kind of a ton of them and had them in the freezer and the fridge and whatnot, and we were just spending time together with family, and he brought me one and I ate it and it was delicious, right? And he thought it was chicken, and then
Yeah.
he had a bite of it and realized it was, and it was pork. And from that moment forward, I completely changed my relationship with food in the sense that I was just open to it. I started eating oysters, I started eating crab, I started eating all of these different things that I had never had experiences with or the exposure like to.
Yeah.
And then I was going to go to nursing school when I
Oh
was in my
wow.
undergrad. I had taken all of my science courses, everything like that. And then I moved to Florence and I saw this relationship with food and the beauty behind it and the love behind it
Yeah.
and the space that was held there. And so when I came back, I immediately switched to nutrition and dietetics. And I think just continuing to foster this relationship, I'm more comfortable in the kitchen than I am anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so being able to share and combine my nutrition background, my science, my education in that with food in actual applicable ways for people to make change is
Yeah.
right where I know it's my
Yeah.
sweet spot, you know.
What is it like as a business? Like you and I don't know if you were ever a full-time private chef. I was like 70% of my work life, I was a private chef. And then I was
Mm-hmm.
teaching yoga for the other 25%.
Yeah.
But like, how easy is it for you to find clients these days and sustain yourself as a business owner?
Yeah, so it's a challenge, right? Like it's
Yeah.
also it's marketing, it's consistency, there's a lot to it. And so I think that's consistent for me. And it's great and it's through referral and whatnot, but
Yeah.
since it's digital space, it is still fairly new to me. And it's something that I'm growing in and
Yeah.
working through. And so I think a lot of it is networking, it's collaboration, it's partnerships, it's things like that.
Yeah.
But it's also nice knowing, and I feel very fortunate that I do have things like that to fall back on to where, you know, I don't have to stress about certain things to where I
Yeah.
can then really push forward with my passion projects and what I love and being able to grow to reach more people.
Yeah. So we have one more minute, but like I'm tempted if you're willing to just start a new live just so we can dig into a couple more things.
Yeah, of course. What is the time? I do have a call at 1.
It's one. So in that case, I think
Oh,
we should say goodbye. But I'm gonna message you and ask for some of your favorite
yeah, of
things. So then
course.
I'll create stories and you can repost them, and that's always
Awesome.
fun.
Yeah, yeah. So.
Let's keep in touch. You're so delightful. It was so
Oh, you
nice talking
too.
to you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Thank you,
having
Kelly.
me.
Bye.
Yeah, ciao. Bye.